Today we will visit Amsterdam again, my hometown where I was born. As a good tradition, I paint every year in November a snowy scene from Holland in the style of the Dutch masters as a Christmas postcard. And on special request, we will return to the Zaanse Schans, once the industrial heart of the Netherlands, and now a romantic place to dream away in the past. My name is Michael Schutte, and thank you for watching Painting the Island. Hello and welcome in my studio. It's a good tradition that we make a Christmas card every year. And this time it's gonna be Amsterdam, the harbor of Amsterdam. But the harbor like it was a few hundred years ago. Later I will show you more about this. And as always we have a lot to do, so at work. Off camera I set up a light sketch with pencil to save some time. To cover the grease of the graphite, we can use a mix of English red with titanium white. English red, I said it before, is a very strange pigment, but it will cover the grease and stay visible in your painting for a long time. With a small round brush and my hand leaning on the palette stick, very important, I sketch over the lines. The Dutch masters like Cornelis Kruseman, Andreas Schelfhout, Albert Neuhuis and many more loved to do these snowscapes and always kept the horizon low, which gives us the space and the opportunity to create a fantastic stormy sky. In the distance we see the city of Amsterdam and the last skaters are fleeing away from the ice as a huge winter storm is coming up. And that might be the end of a maybe beautiful sunny skating day. And in all the Dutch landscapes we always see the windmill. And right before that is a tent where the skaters can get hot chocolate or a glass of wine to warm up inside. The house on the left is probably an office where skippers had to pay a fee to go into the harbor and maybe have a little chat to hear the latest gossips. In the front we paint a small group of people gathered around a fisherman. He made a hole in the ice and caught some fish, which he will sell to the people of the neighborhood. The word is spread quick, so he will make some good business. And if you want to know how skates looked in those days, well, here they are. And these kinds of skates were used even until the 1960s, and no, they are not very comfortable. For straight walls, we can use a stick as a ruler, but I must say, we don't want them too straight, as these old houses were built on mud, and near the river Amstel, they were sacking in the mud back and forward. And yes, okay, they were built on poles, as you might know by now. They drove the poles into the ground until they reached the sand plates 30 meters under the surface. And there's even a song, Amsterdam, that big city, is built on poles. And no, I'm not gonna sing it for you, but even the poles didn't help always, as I remember from my youth in Amsterdam. There were cracks everywhere in the brick walls of that old house. And this house was close to a canal, and when the tide was high, we could hear the water streaming under the floor. As kids, we found this super exciting, but my parents were concerned as the rats and the mice were everywhere. And I remember I had a friend like Michael Jackson in the song Ben. It was a grey big rat, and he was always sitting on the top end of my bed. I gave him little crumbles of my sandwich, so I had a friend for life. But on a certain day, he didn't show up. And I was super sad. I was crying. And no, his name was not Ben. I called him Pete. Enough memories for now. And it's gonna be cold in this painting. But we are here in the warm studio, so let's start with a nice glow on the horizon. If you have painted with me before, you know that I always make a standard backdrop for my skies, following the techniques of the Dutch masters. The next few layers are white, titanium white, a little tiny bit of phthalo blue, and even less light yellow to blush the blue down. So the higher we go, the darker. And as this is a midwinter scene, we can use a bit more blue. On the average, midwinter scenes have those very blue, cold skies. And on top of the top layer, where the universum starts, I put a little bit of purple. I always try to explain to my students that if we look into the sky, we actually looking into a big, hollow mirror. And a mirror is reflecting what's going on the earth. So at the horizon, it's always that glow of the disappearing sun. I like to do my painting early in the morning or late in the afternoon, starting evening. That's the most interesting part of the day. And if we're doing a cold winter scene like this, a bit of purple at the top is certainly a good idea. So you mix some ultramarine with alizarin crimson, add a bit of white and maybe a bit of the ochre tone to blush it down, and then go ahead with the 1-inch brush from Uncle Bob. And the technique is very simple. First we push the paint into the canvas, and then we blend it in with soft crisscross strokes. And that might need a little bit of practicing. And if you think enough is enough, then clean that brush and go in again with very soft crisscross strokes. And thanks to those crisscross strokes, there's already something happening. There's something moving in that sky. So this is a good thing to remember. Never use horizontal strokes in the sky. Always crisscrossing. And I think it's time for some exciting clouds. With a highlight color of titanium white and tiny bit of cadmium yellow, I start here at the top for some light clouds. I use the big 1-inch brush again and press the paint into the wet underlayer and then softly blend it in. And we go slowly down following the diagonal, which will lead the eye of the spectator to the house. Now we can pick up a bit of the wet bluish paint to create a kind of shadow. We blend it in very, very softly. And in that shadow, we can come back again with light. So it looks like those clouds are really stapling up. And then picking up the bluish underlayer, we can create some shadow in those clouds. And then we can go back in again with the highlight. Now the second section is a mix of gray and a bit of purple. We're gonna try to create a late afternoon. The day has been really pleasant, a pleasant skating day with cold but nice weather. But now a terrible winter depression is coming in, chasing away the skaters of the ice into their cozy homes. So we are building up different masses of clouds, which are so recognizably for me in Holland. If you see this weather coming in, summer or winter, you better rush home off the water or off the ice. And I experienced a few of these rolling in thunderstorms, and boy, it can get ugly, as Holland is flat as a dime. There is no resistance of mountains or whatever, so if you are there with your boat in summer or skating in the winter on the ice, you get the full blow. And yes, complete houses, sheds and fences are flying to the air. Really, I saw it happen. Now, let's not forget the left part of the house. Just add some gray and a bit of purple in the sky. Later, we will paint some trees with lots of snow as a backdrop. And to give the clouds a bit more body, we can paint a bit of the light ochre tone over the upper part of the darker clouds. and we fade out the lower part a bit more, and it has a nice shine already. Now let's do a few floaters in the upper part of the dark clouds, but don't overdo it. And I keep on using the corner of my 1-inch brush and make round circle-like movements over the wet paint. Wet and wet is really important. It's a bit tricky, but with some practicing, it will go. And you know what? I still think it's too lame. I want more action in that sky. So we mix purple and dark gray, and yes, there is the real winter monster depression. So cool. And when clouds like this fly over, the temperature can drop down 10 to 15 degrees in one time. Pretty dangerous. But for us painters, it's really nice to paint. It will bring the action in your painting. And after setting up this aggressive mogul, we start fading it in softly. Just clean the brush and go over it, till it all melts nicely together. It's really important that we keep a bit of the glow on the horizon, otherwise we don't have any contrast for the skyline. And the skyline of Amsterdam in those days was houses, churches, windmills, and maybe the mast of the ships who were laying in the harbor. And as we are pretty far away and probably at the end of the river Amstel, we keep it all very soft and misty. But it's fun to do. We keep it all soft grey purple and we use a small round brush. Lucky enough, we have enough light at that horizon, so the silhouette will look fine. And maybe a little bit further on the right side, we can paint a windmill. It's probably on the right side of the harbor, and in those days, windmills were built in wide open spaces where they catch the wind as much as possible. The trade of a miller was really important, and he was condemned to stay around forever on this windmill. You could just not leave a windmill alone. If you ever visit Holland and visit the windmill, you will understand what I mean. But in those days, people did not leave for a ski holiday or maybe a cruise. Most of the inhabitants even never left their city or village or even their neighborhood. Yes, life was simple in those days. Let's paint a bunch of willows behind the windmill. We use grey purple with a bit of burnt sienna for the treetops, and you know it probably on every Dutch ice scene, where willows painted just because they were here. The wood is easy to work with, it grows fast, and you can make everything of it. Roofs, baskets, walls, and it was even used in dikes and still is. The wood is almost indestructible. Yeah, it belongs in a Dutch winter scene. And the good thing is that they never get the chance to grow higher than the windmill, because once a year they were topped. All the trunks were taken off and used for industry, like I just told you, and only the trunks remains, and within a few months they grow again. In the front of this willow forest we can paint another small one, but closer by, maybe they're standing on a little island. It's always a good idea to do so because of the depth feeling. First we give the front part some darker cover because those are the tree trunks and there's a lot of shadow. Then we can put some light on the top with a combination of a light snow color and light burnt sienna. Let's do a bit more snow at the top of the trees and also on the tree trunks. And then we leave this part alone for a while to let it dry. Ice, on the average, has the same reflections like water, but only darker. Certainly in the wintertime when the light is not strong and when the sky is covered with dark clouds. then the reflection on the ice is absolutely darker. The light on the average always loses his strength or power when it goes down in water or ice. And watch my technique. I sketch over the ice with some different tones of grey, just to imitate the layers of ice and snow. Yes, the skaters will die away, but thanks to the English wet color, the silhouettes will stay visible and we can bring them back alive after we finish the ice. Never, one could advise, never paint around a figure. That looks awful. And the more down we go, the darker we can paint the ice. And we are not afraid to use a bit of purple. Coming to the lower parts, I use the same techniques, just sketching from left to right over the ice using light and dark grey, and also a light phthalo blue color to give it a natural, rough, nature ice surface. Quite a mouthful. Let's see how that works. So on the right side, I give it just a little bit of that phthalo blue color, pushing it into the dark tones, which looks pretty nice. Now let's go to the left because we have to deal with the reflections of the building and the persons who are standing there. And I think we can even make it darker. Just dip it into the black gray, dark gray, and see what happens. Just try. It's the first layer and maybe we have to go over it. On the right side, it's even darker because there is a whole bunch of dark clouds hanging around there. So yes, this is an interesting way of making ice. And of course, it's not ready yet. Remember that ice always reflects the colors of the sky, just as the water, like I said before. We let it dry for a few days and later we will paint the figures back and we will decorate the surface with maybe some little stones, twigs, more snow and lots of reeds growing at the side. And before we place the actual reeds, we can do the reflection on the ice already. We can do this with a dark and light ochre tone, maybe with a bit of burnt sienna too. Pulling it down with a small filbert brush, we can fade it softly in and out. On the other side, we can do the same. First, we make it really dark, with maybe even a bit of black to the dark gray. And then we do the same. Here there might be the reflection of a pole. There we do the reflections of the figurines. And then we fade it softly in. Let's make the whole left corner dark. We just pack it in till the far corner. And when we have enough wet paint, we can do some reflections of the house with the yellow ochre tone, a bit of burnt sienna and maybe a bit of grey. Just make long vertical strokes. And then with a clean filbert brush, we fade it in very softly. Later, when it's dry, we will come back and paint the figures with more effects, reflections and other cool little items. And I said it before, we get rid of the blank spaces as soon as possible. It's never a good idea to finish a part of the painting completely and leave blank parts open. It will distract your eyes, and as colors always influence each other, it's better to give every item in your painting a basic underlayer to start with. With a light phthalo blue tone and some purple grey, we can make a messy, muddy underlayer next to the wall of the house. And with some burnt sienna, yellow ochre tone and a bit of grey, we can paint a kind of sand mud bank on the edge. And I don't do brush strokes, watch my technique. I keep shaking the brush and drag the dark ice color right into the mud, which will give a very cool edge on that corner. With a lighter phthalo snow tone, we can drag a snow path right through all the mud, and this will catch the bleak midwinter sun which is peeping through the clouds. And now we have a nice foundation for a cool, muddy back end down the canal, and later we will come back to make it even more messy. Yes, it's always nice to make a mess. It's time for a little break. Relax, and we're gonna show you how the famous Dutch wooden clocks were made. Enjoy! I promised you one more trip to the Zaanse in the Netherlands, and this on special request. And here we are, close to the wonderful village of Zaandijk. You will find here a great collection of windmills and wooden houses from the wider region north of Amsterdam for preservation. And if you take a walk to this romantic village, you will step back into a time machine. And you will enjoy the rest and peace of a time slot when life was good and simple. The milkman is still there bringing his milk. Every house has a name. And goats and chickens roam freely over the property. And every neighborhood is connected with a ditch or a channel, which is so easy when you carry the groceries to your clients. The houses were all from wood painted with green and, of course, the red tiles. In the main street you will find a real bakery, a grocery and much more. And if you need a fish, you throw out a line in the canal under your bedroom window. How easy is that? Now let's take a walk to the big windmills at the water, once the industrial heart of Holland. Because there's always wind there, and they are all still working. The sawmill, the flour mill, and for us painters important windmill the cat. It's a pleasant walk and you will be rewarded with loads of demonstrations. The good thing is that the energy from the wind is free, cheap, clean and above all, no noise. Yes, the duckies love it too. Now let's go back to the village, and when you open your room in the morning, this will be your $1 million view. Isn't that great? And even better, you have your own drawbridge, and if you want your privacy, just throw it up and nobody will disturb you. And in the streets there is no traffic, just you, and look how peaceful and romantic the neighborhood is. We're back in the shopping street, and I had special permission to go into one of the stores and show you how the real Dutch ancient shoes were made. Early in the morning, around 6:15 a.m., when the mist is still hanging over the meadows, the doors of the Klompenmakerij, the wooden shoe workshop, opens. The boss takes a sip of coffee and puts the leather apron on. And then he starts up the machines. He opens the door to let the bright sunshine in and the visitors. There are a few more things to do, like putting up a giant wooden shoe on the wall. It's probably not your size, but it looks so cool, and there's more of them. There's a whole bunch of them. Now isn't that a great decoration for your house? These shoes are made as long Holland exists. As you might know by now, Holland is built on mud and water, and these wooden shoes work perfect when you don't want to sink into the mud. Now let me tell you a bit about the history of this wonderful company. Jaap and Ineke Kooijman founded the company in April 1974. April 1 that is, and it's no April Fool, it's reality. Later son Willem took over, and now their grandsons Justin and Robin are leading the company together with father Willem. And there's not a great number of specialists who can make clocks anymore, so this family is pretty unique. As we can see, it's a complicated work. The machines can do a lot by making the clocks on the right size, but the finishing touch is still done by the hand of the master. So you might say we are witnessing the centuries-old beautiful tradesmanship of the clockmaker, like it was done hundreds of years ago. Not ready yet. The clocks need a special treatment before they are painted and resistant against all weather conditions. And they are made in all sizes. But remember, you don't want to wear them in a condo on the second floor, because they make a bit of noise. But if you live in a muddy environment like the Dutch, like here, well, go for it. And after a long workday, it's time to close the doors and put the light out. Tomorrow there will be another long day for the family Koyman. And with the rolling weeks of the famous windmills, we say goodbye to Holland and let's go back to our frozen world. Yes, the Zaanse is always a special treat. I love to visit this place where we were still living in Holland. I guess this is one of the best preserved places of Europe where you want to feel and see the spirits of the medieval times. And I will tell you a bit more about the history of the Schans, but first of all let me tell you what we're actually doing. We start painting the house on the left side. We give the roof tiles a bit of red. Dutch roofs are red on the average, and also some shadow of the low falling snow. We keep the walls pretty dark as those are in the shadow. We use a small round brush, and a good stone brick color is a bit of grey with burnt sienna and maybe some purple for a shadow effect. If you want to put up some light snow on the edges, like here, we can use a combination of our phthalo blue color, which is titanium white, phthalo blue and a bit of light yellow, but a very tiny mini bit. From here I can tell you a bit more about the history of the Zaanse Schans. During the 80-year war with Spain, there was an earth wall made by the Dutch inhabitants on that place to defend themselves against the Spanish army. And the name of a wall like that is called a schans. We got more places with the same names like Bad Nieuweschans in the province of Groningen and the Oude Schans in Amsterdam. And I know you Canadians cannot pronounce those names, just as my name, Michael Schutte. My students tried time after time, but no way. It's just not in their vocal system. And that is so funny, although we made always the biggest fun during the lessons. Anyway, let's move on with the story. Everywhere in Holland, the resistance against Spain grew more and more till they were finally kicked out on May 15 in the year 1648 by the Pact of Münster. And you hardly can imagine that we had a war with Spain from 1568 till 1648. In those days, that was almost 3 generations who knew nothing but war. And it was an extremely cruel, complicated war, and the Dutch suffered badly till Willem van Orange was able to unite the Dutch, but he was murdered in 1584, but his brother Maurits took over. He battled the Spaniards with success till he passed away in 1625. Lucky enough, the family of Orange was big. His half-brother Frederick Hendrik took over and was able to conquer the Spanish in 1648. The Republic of the Dutch was independent. Our King Willem-Alexander of Orange is, as you might know, a family member of the famous family of Orange. And by now, you will understand that our famous national soccer team is always dressed in orange shirts. So after this short history lesson of the Netherlands, we go on with our painting of the medieval entrance of the Amsterdam harbor. We made a little garden with a view over the harbor and framed it with green planks, and out of the garden grows a small tree. And we can paint this with a small round brush and a bit of black and burnt sienna, with the hand leaning on the palette stick. That is really important. It's sticking out between the two buildings, and I know trees are always a pretty intensive job. Over the fence grew some old autumn leaves, nothing special, but it's always looking good. On the trees we can paint some snow, what is dripping off the branches. And below we can add some snow on the old dead leaves. In between those big planks is always some leftovers of snow. It's just a minor detail, but it's looking pretty cool. Let's go to the other side of the house, and there is a kind of backdrop forest. We can set it up with a fan brush. On one side some burnt sienna, and on the other side grey with a touch of purple, but not too much. And now watch my technique. We wiggle and wiggle the brush and play with the colors. At the top we can add some snow. And snow, remember, was made of white, a little bit of phthalo blue with a touch of yellow. Now we don't want to go too high, it's just a backdrop of faraway trees which you will find on the edge of our Dutch rivers. We don't have those giant high trees like you have. If they getting too high, they collapse because they just can't go deep enough in the mud with their roots. When we arrived here in Canada, I was blown away by those giant big trees what you got here in Cathedral Grove or in the Milner Gardens. It's still amazing for me. And our ground is just too weak. And really, if you stamp or jump on a meadow ground, the person who walks next to you feels the earth move up. It's a very funny feeling, and as kids we made a game of it. But here in Canada we have a sturdy rocky ground and the trees can grow sky high, which is spectacular, certainly for a Dutchman. With some black and burnt umber we can raise a few bare winter trees in the back garden of the house. First we set up a thin line and then make it slowly bigger. At the end of every branch we do no pressure. We let the trees dry for now and we go to the other side of the painting. A good Dutch winter scene is never complete without the famous koek en zoopie. It's hard to translate, but the skaters can warm up on hot chocolate and cookies, or something stronger as a good brandy. As a tradition, I paint every time during the holidays a winter scene, and you saw me doing this before. It was not really a cafe or restaurant, it was just a tent or a tarp on a few sticks. We can paint it with a light ochre tone as it catches the late sunlight. And we keep the figurines grey for now, and later we can come back to give them more color. In the front of the tent we can do a touch of snow with a bluish grey. And with one move we give it a raggedy flag, just like that. On the corners of the roofs of the windmill sheds we can put some snow what is melting away. In the front of the trees we can do the same, put some more snow on it, and maybe also on the top of the trees, but we keep it very thin and use a very small round brush and let your hand lean on the palette stick. It's a bit of a dead corner over there, but the light of the tent and this snow on the treetops will cheer it up and give the spectator a winter feeling. We do a tip of snow on the tent and then we're gonna work on the grasses. We already made a kind of reflection on the ice, and now we can paint a group of that reed of marrow grass close by with some ochre and burnt sienna, and we use a fan brush. On top we give it a few little moves with light ochre and we have a great group of frozen reeds. But not ready yet. Snow will be blown in between the reeds, and this makes it so interesting. We start with a dark bluish grey and put a light snow upon it. And with the phthalo blue color we can lighten it up a bit. And we can paint a piece of ice or an ice block. Putting up an ice block is really cool, literally. And it's so easy. You start with dark gray, put a little bit of light on the left side, and the real highlight is on the right side. And let's paint some more little decorations like little twiggies, stones or frozen mud. Anyway, everything is good. All these little extras will make your painting so much more realistic. So go ahead and see what you can add in this little corner. And I think it's time for a break because I want to show you our beautiful lesson center in Qualicum Beach. So sit down and relax. Before we say goodbye, I would like to show you our Academy of Music and Art in Qualicum Beach. I teach there music and art, and my wife Els card making and scrapbooking. I would love to show you my paintings just to get some inspiration, and I understand that for a lot of you Qualicum Beach is not next door, but if you happen to be on Vancouver Island, just hop in for a chat and take a look around. And of course you are always welcome if you need some advice about materials, maybe color mixing, or whatever you want to know about art and music. My sweet wife Els is a magician with paper, and she shows a great selection of scrapbooking and paper art. And don't forget that we offer a wide range of courses in music, painting, scrapbooking and card making. Yes, there is a whole new world, a whole new creative world for you right at your fingertips. Our steady viewers might know by now that I love to support the North Island Wildlife Recovery Center in Arrington with my paintings. This place, founded by Sylvia and Robin Campbell, is a lovely retreat for wounded birds and other animals who need recovery and help. Also a lovely place for inspiration. So if you ever visit the island, take a look in the center and admire all the wonders of nature. Enjoy! During the holidays we will visit the center again and get inspiration for new paintings. We have a big wall coming up. We made a great foundation already, and now we can make an illusion of the old bricks of the wall. And we do that with burnt sienna, bit of ochre, bit of grey. And some people think that the Dutch invented the brick, but that's not true. The reality is that the Romans taught us 2000 years ago how to make bricks. And everybody thought that the Romans invented the brick, but that's not true either. The first bricks were found in Mesopotamia 5000 years BC. The brick has a 7,000-year history. And like I said, the Romans brought them to Europe and Holland. But when they left Holland, it was a forgotten technique. Maybe we didn't like the Romans. Anyway, in the year 1300, it came all back. There were so many fires in Holland, whole cities burned down. So government decided that it was forbidden to build wooden houses any longer. And slowly all cities had to build their houses with bricks. And it worked. The fires went down with 80%. So far the history of a simple piece of clay which changed the world history. In the meantime I was weathering the stone wall of the Harbour Toll House. I used a bit of grey, ochre and snow color and just mess around with it. And we can also make the snow beside the wall more muddy and give it some shadow as the sun comes from the left. To get this snow more dirty, we use some grey, ochre and burnt sienna. And by using tiny bits of these earth colors, we can create the perfect mud. And above all, we create a great color balance. Actually, we use only 6 or 7 colors in this painting. And the great difference between the cool colors and the warm colors works fantastic to create a wonderful depth in the painting. Now let's take a look at this strange extension which is hanging on that wall. It's probably the cover for an inside stairs for the second story. And yes, it looks weird, but in those days wasn't a beauty commission who criticized your building plans. So if you need an extension or a shed or whatever, go ahead and build it. So we keep it all dark and wrecky, and on the roof we can paint some snow. Often an extension like this was built from riverboat wrecks, and the bricks were gathered from old abandoned houses or castles. In Amsterdam, you can find in old medieval houses leftover bricks from the city defending walls from those days or local castles. Actually, you can see this in more Dutch cities and villages. So we have to consider that this house, of the walls of this house, was not a new looking straight piece of building art. And so close to the river, it was beaten up and wrecked by the weather conditions, who are often hard in Holland. So we paint it as wrecky as we can, with holes, breaks, cracks, mold, and whatever you can make up in a cold, wet environment. And an old door is for painters a fantastic opportunity to paint cracks and bladdering paint and mold and whatever you want to think. And also the snow is moving up by the wind against the door and the wall. And yes, it looks very romantic, but believe me, for the people who had to live in those times, it was not easy without a proper heating, no city water, or even a decent toilet or bathroom. Yes, everything went right into the river. And I wonder how they did it in thick frozen ice in a cold winter period. But the famous painters of those days loved to create those romantic snow scenes. As a special effect, we can lighten up the background for the figures with some frozen reeds and maybe a big dock pole. The ships had to dock there, so there's always a pole or maybe a couple of poles which are now frozen in the ice. We start with some ochre and burnt sienna, and in the front we can paint some snow. There's always snow on the ice and also on the pole. Let's go to the other side. We're going to decorate the trees on the left with a bit more snow on the branches. And we can do that with a very small round brush. Actually, we can paint extra snow on certain places, like the roof and the walls, and just let it drip down. And you know what? Let's paint a bunch of old forgotten autumn leaves which are crawling over the old wall. We use a candy ochre and burnt sienna tone, and on top of it we can add some snow with the snow tones dark and light, white, phthalo blue and a little touch of yellow. Let's take a look at the other side of the lake, because there is a whole bunch of clients waiting to dress up in the cold, cold, snowy weather. As it is all far away, we just give the dark silhouettes a touch of light and dark grey, and I think that's it. And it might be good to give the snow some highlight. And also the windmill can have a touch. The weeks are so loaded with snow that they might bow a bit under the heavy burden of snow and ice, that is. Time to dress up the other skaters. This one is pretty far away, so we keep the colors misty and not too clear. Overall, soft grey colors with a bit of ochre will do enough for this guy. And keep in mind that skaters are always hanging out a bit of balance. And the clothing of the medieval commoners was pretty simple. Leather colors like brown and ochre were often used and cheap, and blue and red woolen jackets and hats, of course, were popular in those days. But the rich merchants, however, were dressed up in fur, mink, and other expensive clothes who are forbidden nowadays. A couple in the middle can be painted a bit brighter, and the jacket and skirt of the lady are sweeping up in the wind, but we keep it still a bit blurry and grayish. However, her head of the lady can have a bit of highlight, just like that. Now let's see what we can do with the front group. The basket is probably for the fish. The guy who's kneeling made probably a hole in the ice and catched a lot of fish and put them in the basket. And yes, the clients are standing and watching him and probably buy some fish which is instantly frozen. In the medieval times there were winters who were so cold that there was no water left in the canals. It was only ice. Well, all fish were frozen, and no, they didn't wake up when the ice was melted. So in spring the canals were loaded with floating, stinking dead fish. Yes, those were the winters. The guy in the back is dressed in a black woolen jacket. And his head is pretty light, and that has a reason, and I will tell you later about this. The man who's sitting on his knees gets a red shirt. From us, that is. Red was a popular color in those days and easy to make. And no, there were no big giant warehouses who sold all kinds of cool fashion from Paris. Most of the clothing were made by the lady of the house. And that same lady was the chief and master of the household in those days. Cleaning, washing, raising the kids, repairing the furniture, making breakfast, lunch and dinner. Keep the master of the house happy, and above all, making the clothes for the whole family. So yes, a heavy lifetime job, and pretty difficult when circumstances were cold and mean. I made the eyes a bit darker and put some wall reflections of the eyes. Now let's move on decorating the people in front. We give the shoes of the kneeling man a bit more snow and spread some ice and snow around him. We give the lady a red cape and make it darker with more alizarin crimson and a bit of burnt sienna and maybe a bit of dark grey. Her skirt can be greyish and we play with light and dark. And now here comes a Dutch master's trick. Right in the middle of the dark fence background, we put a highlight on the guy's head and as well on the lady's head. Now his left shoulder is the darkest point of the body and the head the lightest part. And this is how he is completely separated from the background. Yes, by this technique is the contrast in tones the most important issue. The other lady was noticed by the neighbors that fresh fish was available by the river, so let's dress her up, starting with a grey skirt. An ochre tone jacket and a red bag makes it all complete. And again, light and shadow are important effects in this kind of paintings. And I mentioned this before in other episodes, never ever paint eyes or noses or lips. It's just too far away for details. So we paint only the illusion of a face. Her head catches the late sunlight, so we give it a touch of highlight. And this will separate her also from her shadow background. In between her feet comes a little bit of sunlight peeping through, and it makes it all so spectacular. Let's mess around a little bit in the mud near the edge of the river, just adding some light and some darker gray. And for now that's good enough. At a river, they probably made a hole in the ice, like I said before, so it might be fun to paint a block of ice what was cut out. We start with a dark piece of gray and give it a few tips of light on the top and a highlight on the right side. Ice works as glass. The highlight is always on the opposite side of the subject. And we are almost done. The house needs a few more highlights, so we can start with a light snow color and upon that a real highlight color. Just see what you can do. A few little tips on the wall maybe, on the irons, on the leaves. Down below we can make some little changes, just a few scratches here and there. And maybe we want a few more scratches on the ice. We can do that, but as it is already dry, we have to fade it out with a little pinky. And a few more tips on the snow so here and there, and we might say we created a cozy snowscape of the harbor of Amsterdam 300 years ago. Like the Dutch masters, we only used a few colors and we followed the same famous composition with a low horizon. And even more important, these kind of almost historic paintings created by the Dutch masters gives us an impression of the life in those days. We finally finished our winter scene, cold and wet. It was a lot of work, but we had a lot of fun too. Check it out on our website, or if you are in the neighborhood, come by in Qualicum Beach. Till the next time, enjoy and keep on painting.